Hey everybody, welcome to the GenChurch Midweek Podcast, a podcast about everyday people who are committed to expanding God's family because of Jesus for generations to come. My name's John, I'm the engagement pastor here, and sitting right beside me is Kyle Davies, our lead pastor.
Yeezy.
Look at you, you're rocking one of our sweatshirts right now. Shout out to Generations Apparel.
Yeah, go check it out.
And did you just say Yeezy?
I did.
Yeah, I know. You finally listened to the podcast I told you to listen to. Podcast within a podcast. You know.
Exactly. We consume a lot of content. We don't just try to create stuff out of thin air, but we try to listen to what's happening in our world. We try to also listen to where God is leading and directing us. And so we take those and we try to help your faith become an everyday faith, because we're trying to live out our faith as well. So we're not doing this alone. So shout out Generations Apparel, shout out to other podcasts. We're just we'll just shout out loud, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. So Kyle, I love it, because even here, and you kind of tee this up of what we're doing is that we want to help people become everyday followers of Jesus. And so what that looks like is that it looks like there are new people who are exploring, new people who are new to Generations, who are new to following Jesus, or even trying to figure out who God is in general and what Jesus, who Jesus is.
So if you stumbled onto this, welcome.
Yeah, we're glad you're here. Like, we want to help you explore that. We want you to help you explore Jesus, explore the church. And there's others who are going to be tuning in who's connected with us, maybe are connected somewhere else, but have been followers of Jesus for a while, and they're looking for different ways in which they can become equipped and empowered to go out and pursue and follow Jesus in their everyday life, where they live, work, and play. And we say that a lot, I know that. But Kyle, we've been going through this series of Mark. We're going to be in it for a little bit while longer. I mean, we're only on chapter 2.
Yes.
But I know we've been balancing it between some of our Sunday teachings, through some blog posts, devotionals, and even now our midweek podcast. So Kyle, where are we at in the story?
So we're in Mark chapter 2, and Richard did a fabulous job. Shout out, Richard. I mean, we're just gonna keep shouting people out. Shout out. Did a fabulous job of helping us see on Sunday that Jesus' authority is unrivaled, that he is the authority over the unseen and the seen. And so he's in Capernaum, and it's unique in the passage because it says that he came home, and you're like, wait, Jesus' home was Nazareth, that's where he grew up, but you can see that Capernaum is now his home. It's where he's relationally connected. It's where he's living. It's where he's spending his time. And so he's in Capernaum. He's up by the Sea of Galilee, and this is where he is encountering more and more people. He's going out and preaching in different synagogues around the area of Galilee, and he's connecting with all kinds of people. And so Mark brings us back to Capernaum, and to the story that we find ourselves today is in Mark chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. And so, John, we're going to look at this a little bit. And so as I've set that up, is there anything else that we need to know about the context of Mark in this passage as we prepare to make some observations about the passage itself?
Man, I think the biggest thing that we've seen so far in Mark is that there's really two different things in which we're seeing. We're seeing Jesus in the beginning of his ministry. Okay. You see, we start off with John the Baptist preparing the way for him, Jesus being baptized, and really the beginning of his ministry starting out. And you see two different things happening. You see him gathering his disciples. He's calling people to follow him and to basically, like in modern day terms, basically be apprentices of him.
Okay.
And then we see another side where there's these crowds that are gathering because they're hearing of Jesus. They're hearing about him and what he's doing, what he's preaching, what he's talking about. And you see, just a couple times here, you see some people who are in their culture and time labeled as unclean.
Okay.
And people who would be on the outskirts of society. And I think we even see another part of this of people who are on the outside looking in and how Jesus interacts with them.
That's good. That's good. And I would even throw in maybe another group of people into this is the scribes and the Pharisees, who have a good understanding of the law, of the Torah, of what it meant to be a Jew. And so they're engaging with Jesus in such a way that I think they're almost perplexed at times, because what Mark has done is he tells us who Jesus is in the very first verse, but now he's going to show us how Jesus proves that to be true. And so we're starting to get a glimpse of what it means for Jesus to actually be God and claim to be God, and how that authority of being God plays out rightly in their culture and in their world. And so we get the fun task of saying, okay, if this is the case, how does that bridge to our time and place today? So before I get too far ahead of myself, John, as we look at Mark chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, let's go ahead and I'm going to have you just read the passage, and then let's just make some observations together and see where this goes.
It starts off in verse 13, and it says, he went out again beside the sea, and all the crowds were coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose, and he followed him. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but rather sinners."
That's good. Let's there's that punchline there right at the end.
Right at the end.
Let's make some observations, and as we prepare to make some observations, here's the cool thing: is each and every week we put out an everyday faith study guide with some questions on it that directly connect to Sunday's teaching, but also you can use almost with any passage of Scripture, any narrative, because that's what Mark is right now. And so what we're about to do, a lot of those questions and observations and the meaning that we'll pull out come directly from that sheet. And so if you have your everyday faith study guide, pull it out, and let's even use that and go through that together as we attempt to answer some of those questions, really just off the cuff together. So, John, what's something that jumps out to you in this passage?
Man, I think one of the big things that I notice in this, and I think it's two things. One, we see a similar follow me invitation that Jesus gives to Matthew or Levi in this passage. It's very similar to how he calls out his first disciples, those who are out fishing by the sea. He says, "Come and follow me." And it's a very similar response. He rose, he left what he was doing, and he follows him.
So, quick question.
Yes.
Do you think he left all the money behind?
Dude, I don't know, man. I mean, that's a big question.
He just left his toll booth. I mean, did he leave the money there, or did he take it with him?
Dude, who knows? I mean, I think one big thing in even contextual thing to understand is how tax collectors are viewed back then. And some of you who've maybe been around church for a while, this might be something that's beaten like a horse. But one of the things to understand about tax collectors is that they are not seen very well in their culture. I mean, most people today always talk about getting their taxes taken. But what was happening back then is that there was this under-the-table kind of thing in connotation of most tax collectors, that they were sleazy, that they were cheating people out of their money. And what would happen is many tax collectors would upcharge what the actual tax was to profit themselves. And that was the often normal connotation for a tax collector. So to go into that profession was not seen very well, and they were often people that were viewed as cheats, as sinners, and that they were just lumped in with that group.
Yeah. So Jesus has encountered a couple different people who are clean and unclean, and he calls Matthew here, also known as Levi, to follow him. So do you think that the people of the day would have thought fondly of Matthew? Well, I mean, you already said that they wouldn't thought fondly, but they didn't like him at all. But who would have been worse, a leper or a tax collector?
Dude, and that's That's a fantastic question, because when you go back to like the Leviticus law, and you go back and you look at what they begin talking about in some of the purity of what makes someone clean and what makes someone unclean, you see some of the unclean stuff come from kind of your bodily health. And so if you're sick, or if you have leprosy, if you have this disease, you are seen as unclean. And one of the interesting things to like note in this, and I love, there was a commentator who wrote about this and kind of making this contrast, is that it can often be seen as more offensive of what Levi did, because he intentionally chose to become a tax collector, where someone who gets leprosy, they don't choose that. Like it's something that naturally happens, like diseases that can go around, in that sense of like, none of us choose, I want that disease to come upon my body. Like we don't choose that. And so it can often be seen as that maybe Levi, people would view him as worse because he willingly chose to go into a profession, to go be amongst a group of people that were seen as sinners and unclean because of the sins in which they were kind of seen to be around. They were seen to be cheaters.
Well, I mean, tax collectors were tangible reminders that the Romans were oppressing God's chosen people, and they were a tangible reminder of not just the Roman oppression, but of their past sinfulness that has led them into being oppressed. That because Israel did not follow God's will and God's way, that they were exiled to Babylon, and then when they finally come back and are in the land, they're not in charge of their own land. The Romans are in charge of the land. So tax collectors, aren't just unclean, impure, being seen as siding with Gentiles. They were reminders that ultimately they were living in the promised land without the promised king. Who's in charge at that time? Some other king was in charge. Caesar was in charge. If
you come back to it, you even look throughout the history of the Old Testament and you see how, honestly, they blew it.
Yeah.
They had the opportunity to have a world in which they were faithful to God, and yet continually they chose to be unfaithful.
Yeah. Well, we got on a little bit tangent there. A little bit of the extra context. And so what our hope is in doing some of this with passages kind of in front of the camera is that we'll throw in some of that context periodically, but that we'll really be able to model for you that you can open your Bible and read it for yourself. So here we start out John made an observation. I'm going to go ahead and make one. It seems that when Jesus is reclining, the fact that Mark points this out in how he frames up the response of the Pharisees is that they notice Jesus not just as someone who's at the party, but who's in a position of prominence at the party. And it almost makes me wonder if it's not Matthew that's throwing this party, but it's that Jesus is throwing this party and has invited not just Matthew, because again, Jesus is the one who initiates the conversation with Matthew. So if it seems like that Jesus would have also initiated this party, which means that when Jesus said, hey, let's get all these people together in your house, that he has willingly invited other tax collectors who Matthew would have known, and quote unquote the sinners, so people who would have been on the outside seen as unclean, who were willingly breaking the Torah, the expectations of the Pharisees, that Jesus initiates a relationship and fellowship with them. And to me, that's just striking to say, again, the people on the outside actually aren't the people who you would think are supposed to be on the outside, being the tax collectors and sinners. The people who are on the outside are actually the religious elite. In this case, they're on the outside of the house, literally looking in. So that's just a fascinating, maybe observation that I would throw into there. And then Jesus, as we get through the passage, Jesus almost gives us like the punchline. Yes. So one of the things that is, as you read the passage and we're trying to make some observations, the natural question is, so what's Mark trying to say? What point is he trying to prove for his initial audience? So John, what do you think the main meaning of the passage is for what Mark's trying to say?
Well, I think it leads up all to verse 17.
Okay.
And what you see is Jesus gathered around a table, that he's potentially hosting this party of his disciples. And it says even the crowds that were following him are here with him. And Levi, Matthew, the tax collector he's invited in, and the other people that work with him. His friend group, the people that are seen as unclean and sinners, they're all sitting around this table. And as you pointed out, the Pharisees and their scribes are on the outside looking in at this. And they're saying, why is Jesus sitting down eating and hosting these people in his house, these tax collectors and these sinners? And the response that Jesus gives here is that those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call those who think they are righteous, but those who are sinners. And we even see that paralleled in Matthew, that exact same quotation. And I think what we begin to see here is it's this reminder that the Pharisees, those who are Jews of this time who are observing the Torah, basically it's this reminder that Jesus didn't necessarily come for them, because when you begin to look,
they had the law.
Yeah, they had the law. That's the whole point, is when you begin to look at this, is that the Jews, the whole time, they were in anticipation for the Messiah to come. And the fact that the Messiah is sitting right in front of them and they can't even notice that. That is their big thing. He comes here and he says, I didn't come for you. Like, you were supposed to know that I was coming. Like, the whole Old Testament portrays and calls and prophesies about me coming to make a way for everyone, for all the nations, for all the people. And that's what he says here, is that I came for those who are sinners. I came for those who are on the outsides, those who are unclean, those who are not spiritually clean in this moment, who don't have salvation, to be a part of the family.
You know, it almost makes me wonder who's actually the righteous and unrighteous in this passage. I just, as I'm reading this and I notice this, it's like, supposedly, like, the framework is there's going to be a little bit of understanding was, well, the Pharisees are supposed to have been the righteous, and clearly the tax collectors and sinners are supposed to be the unrighteous. But I think what we get the picture that we see is those who actually follow Jesus and understand the heart of the law are the righteous. But Jesus comes for the unrighteous to display what true righteousness looks like. And so I think what Mark is trying to prove the point of is in the most simplistic of form, is to say what was Mark trying to prove? It's that bottom line is that those who do not know or have access to God are those who God wants to make himself available to. That's who he pursues. That's who he pursues and makes himself known to. But again, in this passage, it's like maybe God's also not just making himself known to Levi and the other sinners, but he's trying to make himself known through Jesus to the Pharisees to say, hey, you've actually missed the heart of the law. And so anytime we get to that type of meaning, what we have to do is say, okay, if that's what it seems like it's meaning for them, that's what Mark's trying to put forward. What then does it mean for us? And I think ultimately that when we ask, what does this mean for us, that we say God's heart is for those who don't have the knowledge that that Jesus is the Son of God, that he does have the authority, that he is the way. And he has also, to trace our observations from earlier, what it means for us is God and Jesus wants to initiate a relationship with you. He initiates a relationship with them. Yes. God also wants to initiate a relationship with you. So John, if we've taken some observations and some meanings, we try to say, okay, here's this general meaning. God wants to initiate a relationship with us, that there's nothing that we have done. There's nothing in our background. Again, no measurement stick that actually eliminates us from our fellowship with God, because Jesus wants to initiate a relationship with us. And he does that through calling Matthew to follow him, and then throwing a party, and then saying that to the Pharisees, hey, you guys have missed it. I'm supposed to be here for people. What are some ways that we might kind of internalize that and say, here's how we could begin to apply that into our everyday life?
I think the thing that shifts my mind in this is whenever I read this similar story in Matthew 9, And in the NLT version, it says, and basically the way it frames it up is that he didn't come for those who think they are righteous, but for those who know they are sinners. Those who know they are sinners. And what we have to understand about that is that no matter how long you've been in the church, no matter how long you've been following Jesus, none of us are not sinners. It's a recognition that we are all sinners. Kyle, myself, there's no level or bar in which, or threshold or amount of good things we can do to not become sinners. Like, we are all sinners.
Those who think they're righteous aren't righteous. So if you think yourself as good, then in effect you're actually not good, because you've misunderstood the point of goodness.
Yeah, and it comes back to a conversation we had a little bit earlier, and I think it's kind of prevalent in here, and what we see is that it is not our righteousness that we find hope and peace in. Rather, is the righteousness of Jesus.
Okay.
That there is no, like, what we see here is that literally, like, when we look around the world, there is no level of someone who is too far gone. There's basically what we get to do is, as we look within our church of who we see on Sunday, who go and are part of us in groups, who we interact with during the week, who say, yes, I'm following Jesus, I'm a part of Generations, or even the other churches around, we're all sinners. And even when we look out in our community and we say, man, there are 9 out of 10 people that I'm going to experience and interact with on a daily basis who don't know Jesus, they're sinners too. And that same invitation that God has given Matthew, that he's given to me, that he's given to you, is available to them as well.
So it seems like you're drawing a line there. So make that tangible or practical. If that's the case, if no matter who you are, what you've done, if you're actually sinful, which means you fall short of the glory of God, it means in a sense you've missed the mark of what goodness actually is. Yes. So if we all misstep, if we all at different times don't accurately be human, like if we functionally don't human well, like if we don't human the way we are supposed to human, like what does that mean? So like make that practical, make that tangible. How do we begin to bridge that gap? How do we begin to actually respond in the way that Jesus responded, if he human the way human are supposed to human?
Yes. So what we begin to see here is that kind of what Jesus is calling his disciples to is to follow him. He's calling them into this discipleship, into this apprenticeship, where it's we begin to look at Jesus and we adopt his lifestyle. That we take his priorities, his characteristics, his habits, and we begin to be shaped by that. And
so make that even more practical.
And so literally what you see here, one of the very tangible things in what you see is that Jesus sees sinners around his community who are people who are often pushed to the edge of society, who are labeled unclean because of what they do, what they've done, where they've been, who they've interacted with. And Jesus invites them into his household and sits down for a meal with them and says, I care about you. I love you. You are invited into my family.
So a very practical thing would be to not draw lines of people that you can't grab a meal with.
Yeah.
To say, I'm not sure we should hang out. And what's interesting is two principles that I see in this is Jesus doesn't grab a meal with them in his house. He gets into Matthew's house before he even leaves Capernaum and begins to follow Jesus along there. So before Matthew just displays anything other than a response to, I'll begin to follow you. I'll begin to connect with you. Jesus initiates a meal in his house. And so I think in a very practical sense, for followers of Jesus or trying to figure out what it looks like to truly follow Jesus well, means we initiate relationships with other people.
Yes.
We get to know them. We spend time with them, and we don't draw lines where Jesus doesn't draw lines.
Yeah.
But the call to those people aren't just, cool, we'll just exist at this dinner together. Eventually, there is a call for not to follow us, but to follow Jesus. So in a very practical sense, what I would say is application is you initiate relationships with others that lead to a meal, lead to coffee, lead to grabbing a beer, something. You initiate something with others.
Be in proximity with others.
Yeah. And again, what I try to encourage people as we look at application, even us here talking, is we almost stayed in very, very general terms. As John said, hey, we're going to be in proximity to others. So get very practical. In terms of, think of your life. Think of someone in your workplace. Think of someone maybe even in your own home, or think of someone in your neighborhood and say, okay, when is a time and date on the schedule that I can have them over for dinner, for lunch, or I can take them out somewhere. Or if you're someone who says, man, I don't have the financial ability, what is God leading you to where you can maybe even get creative? Maybe you partner up with someone in the church who has the financial ability to pay for dinner, and you say, hey, I've got this friend, let's all hang out together, and you introduce things like that. And you begin to build those relationships to get to know, because what Mark is trying to prove as we start is that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And so what Mark is displaying is you got to be in very tangible, practical locations near people and follow Jesus in the midst of that.
Yeah, there's one example that I always loved, and there was this guy who was talking to me, and he was talking about a group in which he used to do, where every Monday night for Monday Night Football, they would go sit at Buffalo Wild Wings, and they would watch the game together, and then during halftime they would have conversation, and they would talk about how they were following Jesus and kind of what's going on in their life, and they begin to have some of that like more in-depth conversation while they're in just a time where they're just being friends together. They're getting to know each other. They're getting to hear each other's story, and they're getting to do something fun that they love together. It's a very tangible way to begin to invite people in and say, hey, you like football? I like football. Let's sit down and watch Monday Night Football together, and then let's talk a little bit about life. Like, how are you doing?
Yeah. And to help you identify some of those people that, again, maybe in the church as the example you provide, or maybe even outside the churches.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Is like that's a common thing. People, you might know people in your life who like sports, and they're not connected to a church. Like, just invite them and say, hey, let's watch Monday Night Football together.
And it doesn't even have to. It doesn't even have to be inherently spiritual. The goal at the end of it is to if you are living out your faith or learning what it looks like to live out your faith, it starts by, like you said, being in proximity, initiating relationships, and being friends with people, despite what others may think about your friendships with them. So not drawing lines where lines don't need to be drawn. And so I would encourage you, think about some place that you go regularly this week. Who's someone that you can initiate a connection with and grab a meal with them. So today we've tried to walk through a Bible passage with you, go through some context, some observation and meaning, and try to put some practical application. It's always best when you do this with yourself, with a group of people, with the Bible, and get very, very specific, especially towards that application piece, because we want your faith to be an everyday faith, because God will and can work through you.
Thanks for joining us on this week's GenChurch Midweek Podcast. If you have questions, if there's something that popped up during this, feel free to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you, because we want this to be an interaction where we begin to help you explore and even to equip you in your everyday faith as you pursue Jesus, as you try to figure out who he is, how to interact with the church, or even what that looks like. Like, be willing to send us a message so that we can even maybe address it on next week, or there's a follow-up conversation that needs to be had, because we, like Kyle said, we want to see your faith become an everyday faith. Thanks for joining us. We'll hope to see you on next week.